Are we good to start now? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our BATOD AGM and webinar. And we're going to have a presentation from the National Association of Australian Teachers of the Deaf as well. So we're excited to receive a presentation from them. And we have our sponsors, RAS Solutions, we have BSO Zone, and we have Phonak, our three sponsors for this event. Now, some quick housekeeping for us all. Please put yourself on mute. Only if you're asked to speak or you're welcome to the stage, will you unmute yourself. Also, cameras off, please. Any questions, please place in the chat. This webinar, AGM, and presentation will be recorded.
Sorry, Martine, just
apologies. The AGM will not be recorded. The presentation will be recorded. Sorry, clarify. Now, captions is going to be on for you. Just click CC if you want captions. Hopefully, you should be able to see the interpreters as well. Eze is on screen currently, and his co-worker is Kat. They're already pinned for your viewing purposes. And we're going to kick off with the AGM for the first half hour. So over to Sue.
Hi everyone, thank you for your attention today. My name is Ian Mortimer. I'm the National Audiology Manager for us at Phonak, and just for the next few minutes, you've got a little bit of an update from us and a little bit of a run through of some of the main paediatric technology that's available. So the first thing I want to spend a moment on is the importance of research and the importance of evidence. Now, Phonak really prides themselves in having a robust claims department. So anything that we say has to be backed up by clinical research. And there's an external investigation that's concluded across the top 6 hearing aid manufacturers that Phonak has by far and away the largest publicly available amount of clinical research. And it's not just about the quantity of research that's available, it's about how easy it is to access, whether it's publicly available and whether it's peer-reviewed or not. And you can see that not only does Phonak have the most publicly available evidence, it also has by far and away the most peer-reviewed evidence, which is a really important consideration when you're considering what technology and features and products are going to be correct for the young people that you work with. Now, it's important for Phonak to recognise that the needs of a paediatric population are different to an adult population. And this is really where the Sky portfolio and AutoSense Sky OS comes into its own. AutoSense Sky OS remains to this day the only paediatric specific operating system that's available. And it's built with 22 years of experience in the realm of artificial intelligence, taking into account the specific listening environments and acoustic lifestyle of a paediatric hearing aid wearer. Supporting the hearing instruments themselves with all of the modcons that you'd expect is the MyPhonak Junior app, again, the world's only paediatric specific hearing instrument app that's available to give young people the personalization that they really want to engage with their hearing instruments, but in a more limited and safeguarded way to make sure that it's an appropriate app for our youngsters. And of course, no hearing solution is complete without the involvement of a remote mic system. Because the classroom that our young people spend so much time in and is so important to their development is a dynamic area. It's not just a teacher talking and lecturing from the front, it's all sorts of different activities. And you can see that 44% of the time, the classroom is not in that sort of lecture or presenter sort of setup. So having a system that can cope with the dynamic changes in a classroom is super important. And the challenges that are needed to overcome the limitations of hearing aid wearers, with the recognition that youngsters age dependent need different amounts of signal to noise ratio when compared to a fully developed adult listener. The impact of reverberation, a lot of classroom environments are full of hard surfaces and lino floors and solid wooden desks. and not a lot of softness, which means that the reverberation that our young people experience in a lot of classrooms can be quite problematic. You couple that with the potential of distance, and it might be, yes, that we can have youngsters with particular needs sitting towards the front of the classroom, but going back to that 44% of the time where the classroom is much more dynamic than that, distance is still going to always be a consideration for good classroom management and equal access to educational content for the individuals with hearing instruments rather than our normal hearing peers. So the Roger portfolio has got all bases covered with a complete classroom portfolio. Of course, the most commonly used product here is the Roger touchscreen mic, which can be used in presenter mode or in small group mode or in pointing mode. But there's a raft of different products specifically tailored to make the best experience for the hearing aid wearer in a dynamic classroom environment. If you do require any further updates or training on any of the portfolio here, the little QR code is scannable on your phones and you can request a further training session with us. On top of the classroom solutions, we've got the personal microphone solutions with a variety of different receiver options. Of course, Roger Direct and the digitally installed receivers is now becoming the norm for Phonak fittings, but you can utilise a raft of the different Roger microphone solutions with one of the other receiver technologies for various different hearing instruments, cochlear implants, or bone-anchored hearing aids. So, thank you for your attention today. I hope the rest of your meeting goes well. And once more, if you do want to get in touch with us for anything else, please don't hesitate to scan the little QR code in the corner and request a meeting with us. Thank you. Goodbye.
Right. Now we should be moving to our main presentation of the evening, which is presentation by the internationally established speakers, Professor Louise Patch and Dr. Kay Scott, who is the chair of the National Association of Australian Teachers of the Deaf. So hopefully they are joining us.
This is Emma speaking, Emma Parker. Hi. Kay and Louise, I've made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen, okay?
Thanks. Fantastic.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Sue. I'm just going to share here.
And throughout the presentation, you're welcome to pop any questions you have into chat, and then we will pick them up later in after the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
Good morning from here in Melbourne, Australia. So it's 6 a.m. here, and I believe it's very late for you all. So thank you very much for having us here today. It's an absolute pleasure to present our work and the work that we've been doing for many, many years. So I'm Louise, and for those that don't know me, I am also a teacher of the deaf that I trained many years ago here in Melbourne. I went from there specialising mainly in language. Then I moved across to the University of Melbourne, where I trained teachers of the deaf for many years. And I'm now at Deakin, where I still work in research with deaf and hard of hearing children and young people. And also I work across mainstream schools looking at children's play, their digital play, and their spoken language in particular. And I'll pass over to you, Kay, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Louise. It's a pleasure to be here today. Yes, it is very early in Melbourne, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Thank you, Louise. I've been lucky enough to know Louise for a very long time, but she was also one of the co-supervisors, actually the lead supervisor on my PhD. So Louise and Professor Diane Toe been working in the area of pragmatics for a long time, and this was one of the first things I took on in addition to my study. So I'm very happy to be presenting about this project this morning. And of course, as Louise said, I'm a proud teacher of the deaf, and I'm a late entry to academia. I've worked in a whole variety of settings as a teacher of the deaf and in central government. And now I've moved to Deakin University. I'm working both as a lecturer and a researcher at Deakin. So back to Louise. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. So we're going to provide you with some background first up, and then we'll give you our results from one of our projects here, which was all to do with the very broad topic of supporting pragmatic skills in deaf and hard of hearing students, with a focus on peer-to-peer interactions. So as an introduction, we know that many deaf and hard of hearing children who use spoken language commence formal schooling now with well-developed syntax and vocabulary. But despite the amazing auditory access and also their age-appropriate, what we're calling structural language, which is around their grammar, their vocabulary, in the case of students who use spoken language, it's around their phonological aspects, so their sound system and their speech. We know that many children now have fabulous access, but there are some aspects of communication that remain challenging for these children. And as our wonderful colleague Yoshinaga Itano suggests, it's around pragmatics, which she claims is the missing link in language learning for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. So the big question is, and bear with us while we just go through very briefly about what pragmatics actually is. And on your right-hand side, you'll see a diagram of a fan, which is all around language that comes from the work of Owens. And you can see on the left side of that there is form of language, then in the middle there is content, and then on the far right, there is use of language. And you're all well and truly aware of what form, which is around syntax, which is grammar, around morphology, which are those tiny little bits of words that you add to a root word, such as prefixes and suffixes. There's also phonology, which is the sound system, and in sign, there's a sign system that also has its own phonology. When we look at content, we're looking at semantics, which is basically the vocabulary. But the focus for us is here in the use of language, which is pragmatics. And so it's all about rules, as language is, and those rules related to the use of language in context. And you may have many students that you work with who do in fact have wonderful syntax, they've got great sound system, they've got a fabulous vocabulary, but there's just this challenge for them in entering conversations, in making friends, and understanding how to use language in social context. And what it does, it draws on understanding of how interactions work in particular contexts. We know that an interaction with our best friend is very different to the way that we would interact with someone that we don't know very well. And so it requires the speaker to be able to engage with their partners, whether it's one partner or whether it's multiple partners in a conversation. And what we refer to here as conversational competence. And conversational competence isn't just about language and the language use. It's about a whole lot of other skills that often involve taking the perspective of another person, often referred to as theory of mind. It also involves understanding the reciprocal nature, and for many of the students that we observe, that can often be challenging because they have a topic, they have knowledge of a particular topic, they can talk about that topic, but then when someone interjects in that with a question or changes topic midway, that's where some of the students can be kind of challenged in how that they work out how to be reciprocal in that particular conversation and interaction. And what we do know from a great deal of our research is that pragmatics develops within social interactions with a range of partners, not just our peers, but people who we don't know very well, people who where the interaction may be quite formal, and for, of course, the people where it's very informal and the language use is quite different. So what are some of the skills that are involved here? The obvious one that we support young children with is that of turn taking. But it's not just about turn taking in a game context, in the sense of your turn, my turn, but there are very nuanced ways that we take turns. For example, we may ask a question, how are you? We may take a turn in response to your partner's question. But then there are other ways, such as eye contact. If somebody looks at you, you can't help but take a turn. Or if the person turns away from you and looks somewhere else, there is this awkward moment, and then someone then will pick up and take a turn. Then there is pausing. Pausing can mean it's your turn. Pausing can also mean I'm thinking, don't interrupt, and then I will come back to it. So pausing, it's a very subtle skill that we all use. Pragmatic skills is also about repair, because in our conversations, there are times that we don't understand or we need clarification. And some of the ways we do that is we might ask someone to say, could you say that again, please? What did you say? Or you might then request for more information. It might be a general what, which young children often use, or it might be specific, such as, did you mean the red one or the green one? And again, these are some of the skills that we support young children to develop over time, particularly once they enter a formal schooling situation where giving specific information is very important. The third dot point here is the skill of contingency. If we think about some of the people that we interact with in our own lives, and you think about what is it about that conversation and about the way that person speaks that really annoys me, which kind of often leads into, actually, I don't really want much to do with them, or I don't really want them to be my friend. And often that is about contingency. That person who you speak to that never asks you a question or never makes any comment on anything that you've added to the conversation, they just go off and talk about their own topic. They don't ever acknowledge any of your contributions, and they just keep going. So in conversations, when we use language, we've got to learn to be contingent. So if you think about a conversation that you have with, say, your really good friend, you might be talking about what you did on the weekend. There's lots of interruptions, there's lots of overlap. But throughout that conversation, you still come back to being contingent on each other's contribution. And together you co-construct the conversation. And when you're finished and you walk away from it, you say, that was a really satisfying chat with that person. So again, it's about listening to what people have said before you, how people react after what you've said, and how you cognitively pull all that together and then make comments on all of these utterances. The next point is around topics. And mainly that's how we slip in and out of topics during conversations. How do we change topics? How do you do that subtly without saying, oh my goodness, I wish this person would stop talking about soccer and get on to something else. And you try really hard by adding things like, oh, have you seen that movie, da 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 da, or have you been to that restaurant? And they may pick that up, or they'll go, yep, and then go back to soccer. And again, not a very satisfying conversation to have. So again, these are the skills that we support young children to develop over time. Other skills include initiation around how we maintain a topic and how we close it off. And this can be both in face-to-face mode and through social media as well. There's joint attention, as you can see in both of these illustrations here. The top one, you can see that those girls are looking at each other. In the bottom photo there, you've got joint attention mainly on a device, but there is interaction and conversation going on throughout that. Eye gaze, how we look at people, how we look away from people, how we can show through eye gaze that we're bored, how we can show eye gaze to show that we're interested, how we can use eye gaze to say you're annoyed. There's a lot of subtle cues in eye gaze. And of course, it varies across cultures. Other skills, request, how to make comments. Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Oh, I've got one of those. How we answer questions and how we acknowledge our partner throughout the conversation. So not surprising that all of these skills here are skills that weave in and intersect with other skills such as social emotional, theory of mind. So there are many other skills that play into pragmatics. So our work, we're suggesting that pragmatics, in fact, is more than just a subsystem, because it's about why we say what we say. It's around conversation, the social rules, how we match the language to the situation. And on the right here, what we've tried to do is to develop the fan diagram that I showed you in the previous slides to this one here, where we have form and content intersecting. But what's important is this overarching area of language called pragmatics, which is how we use the language. And as Yoshinaga Itano says, this is the missing link to what we often do. And I know as teachers of deaf, we often work in this space of form and content, developing their vocabulary, developing their syntax, morphology, and phonology, and then ensuring that we give opportunities for these young children and young people to use language in social situations. And that's that of pragmatics. So we've kind of reconceptualized that fan diagram to be much more inclusive of use across the other two form and content subsystems of language. So this is a way that we kind of, again, conceptualize what pragmatic competency is. There are a lot of cognitive skills involved in pragmatics. It's understanding what's going on around you. It's the cognitive skill of executive functioning. It's around our cultural and our world knowledge. Again, pragmatic skills very much related to social skills, which are formed within our own culture, and how we learn those rules within a culture around what pragmatics is. As I've said earlier, it's around that theory of mind. It's all related to that, how we take the perspective of another person, how we get into the mind of someone else and trying to think about what they might feel, what they might think, and where we see that perhaps what they feel and what they think doesn't always, it's not always in agreement with the way we think and feel, and how we actually navigate that. Pragmatic competence is also around the other subsystems of language. We still need to develop children's language in the areas of semantics, vocabulary, around changing words by adding prefixes and suffixes, around the sound or sign system, and around the grammar and the way that we put those together. It's also about relational, how we relate with each other. Again, also linked to cognitive skills, executive function, and theory of mind. We also know that pragmatic skills are very closely related to pretend play and how children build narrative throughout their pretend play when they're building stories. Pragmatic skills and pragmatic competence is also very closely linked to narrative, particularly as the children get older. And so what we've put here, and we hope you can see this, but it is published in a paper that Diane Toe and colleagues published in 2020, which is access online and opened for people to see. But we wanted to put this in here to show you how pragmatics develops from birth right through to kind of the key area of around 14 years of age. And what we see in this very early part of life is the child is learning their pragmatic skills through their gestures, through their vocalizations, how they request, how they refuse, how they start to comment, and through routines such as peekaboo. So if we pick up that little routine of peekaboo, you have a young baby lying on its back. You've got a parent who covers their face, opens their hands, says peekaboo. And what happens there is that the child is learning from a very young age about waiting, about the meaning of a pause, and then of turn taking. So already in those first 12 months, the child is learning these very early and very subtle pragmatic skills. Then as the child hits 12 months to 2 years, they're also developing their 1 word to 2 word utterances at the same time. And they then start to use these in a communicative intention that allows the listener to understand what they are needing, what their wants are, what perhaps they're requesting, how they engage with their peers, how they start to engage with their people around them, such as typically the parents. They can answer questions. They are acknowledging who they are speaking to. So this continues to develop, and I'll skip now to about the age of 4, where you start to see these narratives become quite sophisticated in that the child understands a setting, they understand what the characters are, but there's also a plot that now has what we call a problem that's entering into their narrative, and that they are able to resolve that. And then as the child enters school at around that 5 to 6 years of age, this is where they start to use language to establish their social status. So again, this really tight link to how they make friends, how they build their friendship groups, and it's all about this use of language and pragmatics. We also see that they're able to maintain conversations, they're able to repair, their narratives become more complex with the high points in resolution. And you can see now this link to literacy occurring here around characters, motivations, and reactions. Again, that's related back to their theory of mind, being able to understand what the character's about, what their motivations are, and understanding more broadly the other. As they move into upper primary, early secondary, understanding jokes, colloquial language, and again, this narrative that's becoming very complex with lots of different episodes. They're able to describe what we call this expository format. They can describe, they can give explanations, and they can give directions. It's not to say that children at a younger age can't do all these things, but they just become more complex and perhaps more common in their everyday interactions. So what do we know about the development of pragmatic skills in deaf and hard of hearing children and young people? We know that they show a great deal of strength in areas such as turn taking, how they greet people, how they ask questions with their conversational partners, and how they can initiate topics. They are all quite strong areas of pragmatic competence that we're seeing. But we are also seeing that that these young people are vulnerable in the area of contingency around their conversational partner. It's also about conversational repair and topic maintenance. And so in this paper with a group of colleagues where we were very fortunate enough to spend a week together at Harvard, where a group of academics came together to really have a deep look at the existing literature around pragmatic skills in deaf and hard of hearing children and young people. And so, again, this paper is available online and open access for you all to go back over if it interests you. So what do we know about preschool children? So that's birth to 5 years. We know that they, at around 12 to 36 months, their conversational skills, that this group of academics and researchers explored, that children with cochlear implants average around greater than 2 standard deviations below those of children with typical hearing. And that's been based on the ratings of parents. Some other studies, we see that children who are deaf and hard of hearing maintain topics for fewer conversational turns around repair, their breakdowns, and also that they make fewer requests when compared with their hearing peers. The research also shows that age of implantation, in fact, might impact pragmatic skill development, and that deaf and hard of hearing toddlers receiving cochlear implants between 8 and 12 months developed age-appropriate levels of responsiveness and assertiveness around answering and asking questions. Those children that were implanted after 15 months were delayed in those social communicative abilities. We've also looked at the literature around children who use sign language, and we found that they often have better pragmatic outcomes at the preschool age. When we move into school age, so that's primary school, around 6 to 12 years, we're seeing that they are active communicators. They show a range of age-appropriate pragmatic skills. Again, it's that broader skill of turn-taking, requesting for clarification, providing relevant responses to their conversational bids of their partners. They're able to initiate topics and ask and answer questions. But what else we notice is that some children are less likely to look at their conversational partners, take longer turns. And interesting, we wonder why they take longer turns. It's often for children who perhaps have 1 or 2 topics that they're very comfortable with. They take longer turns because it means no one will interrupt me and the topic will stay on what I know. We also see in our research that some children provide little verbal or non-verbal feedback to their hearing partners. In other words, when the partner is talking, they're not using what we call phatics, that, oh, great, or making those comments to let your partner know that you're following, you're interested, and you're going to keep going and that you're part of this conversation. Some children are less likely to share and extend the topics by adding new information. Again, that's quite a sophisticated skill. How do you add to somebody's conversational input? You've got to extend the topic. You've got to know about the topic. So it comes back to that world knowledge. Some children, they don't respond to the non-verbal cues of their partner. And in particular, the cues indicating whether the partner was interested in the topic of discussion. Some children in the work of Tova Most find conversational repair challenging. And for some, they have difficulty using language to teach and learn things when interacting with their hearing peers. So particularly describing how to play a game, how to describe, for example, what a task is and what they need to do. So to finish up, We go now into the adolescent group and what the research is telling us about the adolescent group. What we found in the literature is that deaf and hard of hearing teenagers, and again, especially those who use spoken language, experience stress in social situations, and consequently higher levels of stress are associated with lower pragmatic skills. We also, in the study by Ibbotson and colleagues, that teenagers with cochlear implants are likely to make more frequent requests for clarification than their hearing age matched peers. They are asking clarification, typically with closed questions, therefore they'll only receive a yes/no answer. But what we are seeing in the literature is that pragmatic skills do improve with age. The adolescents show greater frequency, variety, and complexity of strategies for maintaining conversations than their younger deaf and hard of hearing students or children. And another is that more than 80% of deaf adults who have hearing parents report being left out of conversations with their hearing family members most of the time. So again, this link to pragmatics and this social use of language. So there are some challenges in understanding pragmatic skills in deaf and hard of hearing children and young people. And why that is so is it's often a really complex area to assess. If we think about our own assessments we use with the students that we work with, typically they are language assessments that really explore and assess young children's and adolescents' structural language. So that syntax, for example, the morphology, the phonology, and certainly their semantics. So if you even think, do you actually assess young children's pragmatic skills? And if you do, how do you do that? It's quite challenging because it's time consuming and there's not a one way to do it, nor a standardized way. There's lots of checklists out there. There's lots of ways of doing it through video analysis. In our own research that Di and I have done over the years, we noted that there were a lot of contrived tasks with adults. So for example, in your top right-hand corner, that diagram or photo there of a barrier game, trying to understand whether students can listen, whether they can follow instructions, and whether they can converse with each other. The work that Di and I have done with peer-to-peer interactions really have been up till now in contexts where we withdraw the students from their class, and we typically work with students who are integrated into mainstream schools, but we withdraw them from their classroom with a peer, and we might do, for example, question and answer games, such as, one like, how many, what color is Humpty Dumpty, and so the answers are known. So we've done a lot of research in that area. We've also looked at expository discourse. We've taught them games such as the secret square game, or the one on the right there is a rat-a-tat-tat-cat card game, where we withdrew the student, we taught them this game that they had never played before, then we invited them to go back into the room with their peer and teach them how to play the game. And again, we've been looking at what they tell their peer and how they negotiate when they need clarification around the rules of the game. The other way that we've done that is in spontaneous conversations. Again, as you can see in the bottom photograph, we withdraw the students into a room, we set them up with a camera, and then we ask them to have a conversation. And then we take those videos and we analyze their pragmatic skills. But in all, when we've gone through all the literature, we've noted that there are very few studies that have investigated the way deaf and hard of hearing students interact with each other during small group learning in mainstream classrooms, which is the focus of our study. And I'll pass over to you, Kay.
Thanks, Louise, for setting the scene very well. I'm going to take over and talk about the particular study that we're talking about today. The context of the study is what we know about children who are deaf and hard of hearing in Australia is that about 95% of children with a profound hearing loss receive cochlear implants, and we now know that in Australia these are generally bilateral. The last figures we really have about educating students in inclusive settings is now 20 years old, but at that point there were about 83% of children who were deaf and hard of hearing who were integrated, fully included into their setting. And we can only assume that that figure has risen since that time. In Victoria, many of these students attend a mainstream school with a deaf facility. So they are enrolled in the mainstream school, but supported by teachers of the deaf. So they're fully integrated, fully included in the school. They work collaboratively with their hearing peers, and they receive some additional support. It might be through classroom support and some withdrawal sessions, either one-on-one or with a small group. Oh, oops, what have I done? Why am I not progressing? Got no dots down the bottom, Louise. Would you like to just move my slide on, Louise, please? Thank you. So this research started as an investigation about the interaction in small groups. We wanted to look at children in deaf facility who, as part of their program, had a wellbeing session every week. And we wanted to look at what these small groups, what opportunities the small groups offered for peer-to-peer interaction. And as Louise has stated very clearly, you know, that's an important aspect of developing pragmatic skills. So the aim was to look at that, and the research questions were, what are the opportunities for peer-to-peer interaction between deaf and hard of hearing students in foundation, which is the first year of schooling in Australia, to year 6, so students aged between 6 years and 12 years. And this was during their wellbeing session. So children who are deaf and hard of hearing were withdrawn for one wellbeing session a week, either with 1 or 2 teachers of the deaf. And there were a group of children, and the number of children ranged from about 6 to 10 within those wellbeing sessions. And the second thing that we wanted to look at is what are the pragmatic skills that are used by this group of students during these interactions. Thanks, Louise. So there is a total of 41. There's just a question about fully inclusive settings. Yes, mainstream settings. So a typical primary school in a suburb in Melbourne, but also they will have a deaf facility with students receive additional support from a teacher of the deaf. Hope that answers your question. So we had 5 groups of students, 41 in all, from the first year of schooling, foundation, to year 6. And you can see the figures broken down on this slide. Have the year levels on the left-hand side, the number of students, the age of the students, the gender, and you can see it's fairly even in gender, with some areas having more boys and girls and vice versa. And the devices that we use. So we had some students using bone conductors, cochlear implants, hearing aids bilaterally or unilaterally, and some students had a mixture of cochlear implants and hearing aids. So there was a mixture of devices used by students. And we looked at these sessions through a mixed method lens. They were, as I said, the students were withdrawn from their class as part of their regular curriculum for these weekly wellbeing sessions facilitated by 1 or 2 teachers of the deaf. So these sessions were videotaped. 2 of these sessions for each age group were taped from 2 different angles so that we had a good perspective of what the children were saying, and we could clarify what they were saying at particular points. All the interactions were transcribed, and then we coded them into 2 types of interactions: peer-to-peer. So they may have been working in pairs or a group of 3 during the teaching session. And the second coding was where the situation was teacher-led. So was the teacher giving instructions? Were they asking questions? Were they responding to the student? So any interaction which was led by the teacher received different coding. And we looked at these 2 types of interactions, both from a quantitative point of view. So we looked at the percentage of the total lesson, and we looked at how, what percentage of time children were engaged in peer-to-peer interaction, and what percentage of time they were involved in teacher-led interactions. And then we looked at it with a qualitative lens, and we looked at the sort of skills which Louise has described so beautifully this morning that they were using during peer-to-peer interactions. So let's move forward and have a look to see what we found. So this first slide tells us about the opportunities that were provided in these wellbeing sessions for peer-to-peer interaction. And you can see on the graph across the bottom axis, we have the foundation students, thank you, Louise, lesson 1 and lesson 2. And then we move through to year 1, year 2 and 3, year 4 and 5, and year 5 and 6. And up on the axis on the left-hand side, we can see the percentage of time that was spent on those 2 different types of interaction. The first being the teacher-led and the second being peer-to-peer. And you can see there throughout all of the graphs that there were few opportunities for peer-to-peer interactions throughout each lesson across each year level. And there was actually one lesson, the year 2 and 3, where it was purely teacher-led and there was no opportunity for peer-to-peer interaction. We can see, however, if we look at the right-hand side of the slide, that the year 5 and 6 students were provided with a higher percentage of time to interact without teacher input. We might move forward. Oops, yep. And so now that information has been aggregated into just 5 bars in our bar graph, so session 1 and session 2 have been combined. And we can see that the highest percentage of time at all year levels was spent in group interactions led by the teacher. So in every year level, foundation, year 1, year 2 and 3, year 4 and 5 and year 6, that most of the time, the greater percentage of time was spent in interactions led by the teacher. However, the trend across the data shows that the opportunities that were given for peer-to-peer interaction increased with each year level. So there is a trend line. There are some different results there, but the trend line is purely up and up. So we see that the older students were provided with much more opportunity for peer-to-peer interactions. Okay. And I'm going to hand over to Louise, who's going to talk about the qualitative data that we've got from the research.
Thank you, Kay. So I'll go through this very quickly because I'm aware of time, but we just wanted to provide you with just some examples here. So this is the year 1, second year of schooling in Australia, and this is the group of 10 students who were in asked by the teacher to go into groups of 3 or 4. And what we've got here is Anna, Harry and Alice. And the teacher of the deaf, the aim of this session was to support their conversations. So when we look through and read that quickly, we can see that the students overall are taking turns. They're able to introduce the topic. They're able to co-construct the conversation together, and that they appear to be contingent on their partner's contribution. So if we look at line 15, Anna, I don't know what's mine. What we call that is topic initiation as well as clarifying, because she doesn't know what the task is about. So Harry moves it and in the next line and says it's a hose, it's a hose. Now we shift topics. Alice says the flag of red. So she has in her hand a picture of a flag that is used for life-saving. And Anna says it's a flag, it helps the people. So she acknowledges what Alice says, but she extends the topic by saying it helps the people. Then Harry then repeats that and says, yeah, it helps people because when this goes up, you might get caught in a rip. Then he says, do you know what a rip is? So again, he's extending that topic, but he's also checking that his partners understand what he's saying. Alice says no. So then he continues to extend. Well, when you're at the beach, if you're swimming, you can see far, far out to sea and the flag will fly. Anna says, oh, good thinking, Harry. So then now Harry moves on to his own topic. Mine is this is a minor light. You put it on your head. And when you go into the mine, and then you can see the mine. And finally, Anna says, I want to see that one. And by doing that, she's acknowledging her partner's contributions, and then they engage with the object. So a lovely co-constructed little piece of peer-to-peer interaction here. We move on to the 3 students who are in years 2 and 3, a combined group. Again, there were 2 students. And here's a little snippet of Joseph and Tina talking with each other. And the teacher of the deaf had talked to them about the strategies to use when conversing with people that they don't know very well. And they suggested that the students ask each other about 3 different questions. So this is quite a humorous little piece here, because Joseph clearly doesn't want to do this task. But anyhow, he goes off and he says, what is your favourite food? So that was a question that was in fact modelled by the teacher. So he's very compliant, our Joseph. And then he changes over and says, I don't like, and then Tina says anchovy in a way that says anchovy. He says, well, I like pizza, but I don't like the flavour, meaning the flavour of anchovy. So again, he's been very contingent on what Tina has said. And then Tina, here's a lovely example of the use of phatic. She's not interrupting, she just went, oh. So then Joseph continues with, I don't like pepperoni, but I like something called quipetta. And you can see here, Tina's a very good girl and doing what she's told by the teacher. And she's going, okay, back to what is favourite. So she redirects it back to the task. So Joseph, no, overtime, we're done. And she can't believe it. Because he interrupts her, indicates that he's had enough, the task is finished. What? So she's seeking that general clarification. Joseph, we're done. What? We're done. So Tina, very nuanced here, manipulates the language used to get back to the task. What's your favourite roller coaster? I haven't been on one. You didn't been on a roller coaster? I know a roller coaster, but never been on one. So he's trying to break this conversation down. He's using minimal answers, but at least he comes back, he clarifies and extends the response. So that's a lovely little piece of what we typically see in classrooms when one child perhaps doesn't want to do the task and the other one is keeping to the task. So finally, the 5 and 6s, we again had 10 children here, the 10 to 12-year-old group in small groups. And they were brainstorming ideas around the camp. So here they were wanting to have cabins separated by gender, because last year in the girls' cabin, everyone put sheets over their beds so no one could see them, and we love privacy. One of the girls says, we need privacy. But here's Hugo. He says, yeah, but it's gonna be like sort of the same as the camps we have, like a boy with a boy, girl with a girl. No, we weren't doing that. Like they will all need privacy, like in your house, you all need privacy. And Hugo, some people don't need to have privacy. Yeah, we all do, Hugo, but if we all trust each other, I don't want to wait. I have an idea. What if you have one side boys and one side girls? And Emma says, I think we should just still keep it gender specific. But Asha says, just keep it gender because it's just in case. Yeah. And then Hugo, if our parent has consent to go, we can do that. So it's a really lovely interaction here of quite sophisticated pragmatic skills. The topic continues over several turns, and there's acknowledgement of contradictory contributions. They don't all agree, but it's a very smooth conversation. It's a conversation that's been co-constructed with an agreeable outcome. So again, as you can see, much more sophisticated language use here by our older students. So finally, the 5 and 6s, we again had 10 children here, the 10 to 12-year-old group in small groups. And they were brainstorming ideas around the camp. So here they were wanting to have cabins separated by gender, because last year in the girls' cabin, everyone put sheets over their beds so no one could see them, and we love privacy. One of the girls says, we need privacy. But here's Hugo. He says, yeah, but it's gonna be like sort of the same as the camps we have, like a boy with a boy, girl with a girl. No, we weren't doing that. Like they will all need privacy, like in your house, you all need privacy. And Hugo, some people don't need to have privacy. Yeah, we all do, Hugo, but if we all trust each other, I don't want to wait. I have an idea. What if you have one side boys and one side girls? And Emma says, I think we should just still keep it gender specific. But Asha says, just keep it gender because it's just in case. Yeah. And then Hugo, if our parent has consent to go, we can do that. So it's a really lovely interaction here of quite sophisticated pragmatic skills. The topic continues over several turns, and there's acknowledgement of contradictory contributions. They don't all agree, but it's a very smooth conversation. It's a conversation that's been co-constructed with an agreeable outcome. So again, as you can see, much more sophisticated language use here by our older students. So, Kay, back to you.
Oh, here I am. Forgot to unmute myself. So hopefully I'll be able to wrap this up quickly, and we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So in summary, in these wellbeing sessions, there were relatively few opportunities for peer-to-peer interactions. There was a gradual increase in the percentage of time as the students got older, which really suggests that gradual release of responsibility. Teachers provided a lot of modelling and scaffolding about how conversations should take place. This was particularly evident where there were 2 teachers in the room and they could interact and model for students. The pragmatic skills continued to develop throughout the school years, and but there were limited opportunities in the early years. And we really took a deep dive into that and thought that, maybe this would reflect teachers' understanding, their deep understanding of the individual students' learning needs and the very young students in their class, in that they needed more modelling, they needed, their pragmatic skills were not as well developed. We saw a range of effective pragmatic skills in the peer-to-peer interactions. There was broad skills such as turn taking, answering questions, and we saw those in the little snippets of the vignettes we chose to present today. And the older children demonstrated far more nuanced skills such as topic extension, collaboration, co-construction, contingency, and the manipulation of language. Just, Louise, do you mind just moving me on? My dots aren't coming up for me at all. Thank you. So one of the key findings was that the learning opportunities, what was offered in the classroom, impacted on the way the pragmatic skills were supported. And so for some teachers of the deaf, they were supporting the classroom program and trying to build vocabulary and build in a pragmatic component into the session. For some teachers of the deaf, they were doing a more specialised session, and what the topic of the activity was really impacted on what pragmatic skills were being supported in the sessions. And it brought up the question, how best can teachers support pragmatic skills, and when should we release control as teachers of the deaf? We have to think clearly if developing pragmatic and speaking listening skills are the major goals for students that we're working with who use spoken language, then they may need more opportunities than we're currently providing to develop these skills. And we have to think about interventions that also target other pragmatic competencies, theory of mind, developing narrative skills, and providing a number of contexts such as pretend play and more open-ended tasks. The tasks that we saw and recorded during the wellbeing session were quite prescriptive tasks. So some thought has to go into whether that's going to help develop pragmatic skills. What are the implications for us as teachers of the deaf and as practitioners, as academics? Sikowski, Toe and Patch in 2020 had a call to action to support teachers developing an understanding of the link between pragmatic language delay and the development of social communication skills, and that there's a need for further intervention and research to support professionals and researchers working with deaf and hard of hearing children and young people. So clearly further research is warranted. We need to highlight the more or better, most effective contexts and pedagogies to support pragmatic language skills in our deaf and hard of hearing students. And we have to, as researchers, provide teachers with ways to assess, plan, implement and support deaf and hard of hearing students' pragmatic skills. So as always, in the world of research, there's always more to be done. Thank you very much for your cooperation and for listening to our presentation today. I know Therese has pointed out there are a number of questions in the chat box. I didn't want to bring them up, Therese, until we had finished our presentation. I might bring them up now.
One of the questions is, could you give some information on the socioeconomic background of the children and young people in your research, if possible?
Louise, do you want to do that, or are you happy for me to do it?
Oh, go for it, Kate. That's fine.
This school is actually in quite a culturally and linguistic diverse area, but is socioeconomically very middle class, I would say, is probably the best way to describe it. But there are a lot of different ethnicities seen in the school. So it's not white Anglo-Saxon children. There's a wide diversity of children in the facility and in the school in general.
Thank you. And another question was, what is meant by fully inclusive? Do you mean attending mainstream settings or a setting that has a clear culture of inclusion in which the children feel part of the community?
So children are fully included in the school. It's a school where it's hard to differentiate whether the child has a hearing loss or not. Some students' level of support is quite minimal, and some receive a higher level of support. So the type and degree of support for each child is really based on their educational needs, but teachers of the deaf work with parents to develop a plan that particularly addresses each child's needs, educational needs.
There's also a question about comment as a fascinating piece of research. Can you tell us if Todd's teaching the sessions were the same ones across the different age groups?
Do you want to answer that one, Louise? Oh, you want me to do it?
You can do that one, because I'm just pulling up some checklists to show. Alex has asked a question later in the about assessments and tools, so I'm just pulling those up. If you want to just talk quickly. Yeah, perfect.
So in this particular facility, and it doesn't work this way in all deaf facilities in Victoria, but in this particular facility, the teacher of the deaf works with a group of children, so providing classroom support, one-on-one support, etc. So the students in most of the wellbeing sessions worked with the teacher that they normally would work with during class time as a support in the classroom and in one-on-one sessions. In a couple of the sessions, and I'm thinking about where there are two different year levels, some students would normally be supported by another teacher of the deaf, but were included into the wellbeing session because their maturity and pragmatic skills fitted better with that group, another group of children. Either they had more advanced or their skills weren't as well developed as other students. So it's a bit of mixing and matching, but generally with the teacher of the deaf they normally worked with.
Thank you. A question that had popped up earlier was when I suggested a focus on pragmatics for a deaf child I was working with, the response from the speech and language therapist was that it was difficult to assess in an area where SALT and Todd set different targets. So this individual wondered if there was any possible solutions you can suggest to this.
Yeah, so I'll go to that one at the moment. They're absolutely right. It is a very challenging area to assess because it's about social use. But if I can share my screen, I'm not sure who's sharing. Is that okay?
It's Emma here at the moment. Yes, if you just press share screen, it will swap over to you because you're co-host.
Okay, no problems. Thank you. So it also probably, this is what we call the pragmatic checklist. So this, can you see mine? Yeah?
Yes,
Yes.
look good.
Fabulous. Okay, thank you, Kay. So this is one that was by Goberis, Goberis, which is called the Social Communication Skills. It's a pragmatic checklist for younger students. So this might be one, and I can send that, no problems at all. And it's and we do this in another workshop where we kind of critique these. It's very broad because the criteria here is not present, uses no words, uses 1 to 3 words, uses complex language. So, for example, make polite requests, make choices, gives description of an object, expresses a specific personal need, requests help. So what this misses, of course, is context, but you can make notes about that. And if I scroll down, it goes right through to knowledge, imagination, and then you'll see down the bottom here is an interpretation of what they score and the age group. So it goes right up to the age of 60 months. So you can see how that's scored and what that means and how you interpret it. So I'm very happy to send that if you like. And it's also related to the missing link, which is Christina's work, but Diane Goberis. So that's one that you might be interested. For older students, bear with me, here it is. It's an old one, as you can see, 1987, but we still use it, which is called the Pragmatic Protocol. So just bear with me as I scroll. Here it is here. And I'll just make that a little bit bigger. Is that okay? Okay, is that all right? Just...
Yep, that's fine now, Louise, that you can read that. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So there are 30 pragmatic aspects here, from the Speech Act through to topic, ways of term taking, their lexical selection. So in other words, their word selection, can they vary in their style? And this one, which is lovely, is it also looks at the what we call the paralinguistic aspects. So your, intensity, pitch, fluency, and then it also looks at some lovely non-verbal aspects such as the eye gaze. So this one is for older. Again, sorry, it gives you the definitions. Sorry about the scrolling madness here. And I can also send this to you all. But it is old, but we use this as well because there isn't anything else out there, as you've all highlighted how challenging this is. And so you might use that with either an observation, or taking videos is always the best thing that we use, because you can go back and have a look several times. You can also use it for other parts of the curriculum to see, particularly in play episodes. For example, if they're in pretend play, you can also be looking at not just their pragmatic skills of how they take turns, but how they build narrative. So that's always a lovely way as well.
There's a question about how often might you use these lists during the year, and also are these two checklists specifically for deaf children or hard of hearing children, or are they developed to ascertain pragmatic skills for all children?
Great question. So how often? Typically we would use those at the beginning of a year, just to see where they're up to. And we have used them mid-year, around that reporting time, and then end of year to sort of measure pre-post. But if it's too time consuming, we pull out the middle year and just keep the pre-post, if you like. So we've done that. Are they for deaf and hard of hearing? The Gaberas one isn't it Kay, I think?
I think so, yes, Louise.
Yeah,
but the other one, I don't know.
The other, no, Pratin and Kirshner isn't. It was done with language delayed children, but we apply it to the deaf and hard of hearing students as well.
There's also a question that is it possible to get a list of your references, please? And has the study been published yet? And if so, where is it available?
It has been published, and it's in our journal, which is the
yes. Deafness and Education International. So it's in number 4 of 2022. So the last journal published at the end of 2022, Deafness and Education International, which you will all have access to as BATOD members.
Yay. So the references, we can send that to you if you like, Teresa. We can send you that and those 2 checklists if you like.
And I don't know if you've seen the comment about the from Venue, if there's anything you want to reflect, add upon their reflection in the chat, that it's what a straightforward research. It is probable that the quantity of exposure and daily discourse that deaf people might be a factor that prompts growth in pragmatic abilities rather than age-related changes. In the context of your research project, I see that some deaf students are able to pragmatize their language effectively, while others are unable to do so. I'm not sure about that. Is any further comments you want to make on that reflection?
Absolutely. I think you've kind of highlighted another area that we've looked at, and it is all about opportunity. We've developed a what we call the conversation model, and each letter of the word conversation stands for something. So the C in conversation stands for contingency, and the O in that conversation stands for opportunities. So you're absolutely right. Opportunities is critical, and you're right. If they've got more opportunities to interact and to use those pragmatic skills, then obviously they're going to develop them more, and that it may therefore not be age related. So yes, and again, we can send, that's in a book chapter. We can send you that as well if you like, Teresa. It's the whole conversation model that we can, and for example, the N in conversation is non-verbal. The V is verbal. So each letter stands for ways that we can support pragmatic skills, and gives you some examples of how to do that.
Thank you. And I appreciate that we've been over time, and it's late in the evening for people who still have work tomorrow. So if there are further questions, reflections people want to make, they can contact you directly through the emails you've shared on your screen. Is that correct? And I'm going to try and find the link that somebody's asked for now in terms of the access to the BATOD article. So I'll do that, Sue, while I pass over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And it just falls to me to say thank you very, very much to everybody for attending. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our interpreters, Kat and Ezzy. Thank you to all the BATOD people behind the scenes, to Emma and the conference committee for setting this up. And thank you enormously to Kay and Louise for a fascinating presentation, which was really informative and extremely useful. And I know there's lots of questions still coming in, and I hope we'll be able to address them at some point in the future. But thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming. I know we've run a little bit over time, but I don't think anybody's going to complain. And you'll be receiving a link to an evaluation form shortly after we close the webinar. Please, please, please fill it in and return it. It'll be extremely useful to all of us. And with that, I think I have to say thank you so much again to Kay and Louise for coming so early in the morning. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you to everyone.
I hope your weather's a bit better than ours is.
We had a beaut thunderstorm yesterday. Yesterday morning. It was very loud and very heavy.
And with that, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, and just what a fantastic evening. Lovely to see everybody, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for having us. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yes, thanks for the invite. It was